Good new week to you. Welcome to Medusa Was Framed. My name is Joyce. Today I have another of a growing list of topics involving the reset architects, as I call them. This topic I fell upon while researching my last video, which was about St. Vincent's, Infant Asylum, St. Vincent's Guest House, and what was going on in New Orleans at the time. I stumbled upon this gentleman and found out that it wasn't just one gentleman. There's not just one Flay. There is quite a legacy of Flays in the historical narrative. So again, these are architects, I say in quotes, who were extremely prolific in a very curious and suspect time in terms of civil war and it affecting resources, supplies, and all that good stuff. Anyway, so let's proceed. Now, the first thing that I want to say before I continue is thank Michelle and Melanie for inviting me to join the Unguru group. So I am part of the Unguru ensemble now. We are reclaiming peace and prosperity through exposed knowledge. Michelle Gibson is a member of Unguru, and she just recently interviewed me, so that should be up on the platform soon. You can find us at ungurulife.com. So we're a group of independent educators, independent journalists, independent artists, independent music makers, independent filmmakers, independent educators, all coming together in a platform that is based on exposing knowledge and blowing the, what should we call it? You know, the media out of the water, a place of uncensoring. And very, very, very honored to be asked to be a part of this group. Basically, I think a quote that sums up this movement is never argue with someone whose TV is bigger than their bookshelf. So thank you very much to Michelle Gibson for finding me and reeling me in, and for Melanie for giving me the thumbs up board. So anyway, ungurulife.com if you're interested to learn more. But let's proceed with the legacy. It doesn't really matter, but I'll make that bigger. So this is not where the Flay story begins by any means, but it's where I'm going to begin. This is William Alfred Flay, Sr. He was born in 1804. He was the mayor of New Orleans from 1840 to 1842. Then he lost a term and he was reelected from 1843 to 1844. His father was an English merchant, Flay being a name that was already known in New Orleans for some time, since the 1600s. Jean-Baptiste Flay. His mother came from an influential Creole family, Eugenie Riolo. I probably said that wrong. William here was sent to England to further develop what seemed to be very natural mechanical and architectural skills. He did well. He returned to take over his father's cotton business, not to take over, but to join in. He eventually did take over. His father, Jean-Baptiste, created the Flay Cotton Press Company, which was the first large industrial firm in New Orleans. And this propelled this William Flay into public view, already more than the legacy of both his names did. So he was of the Old America Party, the Patriot Party, in legacy and tradition. But because of the influences of his mother, who was Creole and of a notable Creole family, he was encouraged to run on a brand new party that was called the Native American Party, that was formed to develop a voice for the Creole and indigenous people, all the indigenous people, the Native Americans, all of them. And that's the platform that he ran on in 1840 to become mayor. He also sat on the city council for some time and so, served several terms in the state legislature. He was considered the most influential mayor up until that point. Now, there were several things that had happened before his taking the big chair in City Hall that had a huge effect on the mayor that he was able to become. First of all, was the financial panic of 1837. So, and you know, this is something that isn't taught in schools, and that's a shame because we're kind of living through it again. What America was in the late 1830s went into a financial crisis that lasted into the 1840s. So there was a recession, depression that lasted for several years. And so much so that all of the woo-ha Western expansion manifest destiny nonsense was stalled. Profits, prices, and wages were jacked, and unemployment rose. There was a lot of speculative lending in Britain that was affected by this. There was a collapsing land bubble as a result, creating a sharp decline in cotton prices. Think of all the plantations. And the international movement of bullion or specie, all were factors. So if I understand this correctly, short and sweet, the banks in New York City literally ran out of gold and silver because this downturn in the economy scared all the investors. So they made a bank run at a time when gold and silver was there, not just paper. The banks in New York ran out of money, and the banks stopped paying in bullion because they were out of gold and silver, and they were not able to, nor would they, redeem paper for its value. And this all being a result of President Andrew Jackson not extending the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, which was the second federally authorized Hamiltonian bank in Philadelphia, chartered from 1816 to 1836. So banks otherwise were state-run organizations exclusively, but you couldn't deal with a bank in another state. So if you were in New York, you couldn't really do much with a bank in Massachusetts. Everything was state-run. was called the President's Directors and Company of the Bank of the United States. That was the Hamiltonian Bank. This bank was a federal bank, meaning all states could participate openly, and it could lend money to the United States government. So Jackson said no. No to the feds. Anyway, so there was a brief recovery in 1838, but the nation sat in recession for about 7 years. Half of the banks failed during this time. Half of the banks. Think about that. Huh. Wonder if that reminds you of anything that you've experienced in your life. By 1850, there was a boom again, and that is in large part attributed to the California gold rush, bringing gold back into the public trust. That's a whole other story. I grew up in California, and as an archaeology student, worked in Old Sacramento in that gold rush place. But anyway, so let me reduce William and move on to this. So for those of you that haven't been to New Orleans or are just not really familiar with New Orleans, I'm going to have a couple maps following, because what I'm going to talk about is how when there was a huge influx of Americans into this new American territory, which had been French, right, through the Louisiana Purchase, there was a lot of fighting, arguing, who's got the biggest sword going on between the French and the American. So I really love this photo. I love anything that indicates a star fort. But just in reference for those people that don't know, so we've got the Mississippi River here, and this was originally the city of New Orleans, the walled fortress city of New Orleans. And the boundaries were the Mississippi, Esplanade, Rampart, and Canal. This began to be developed over here and became known as the American Municipality, and that extended out into the development of Lafayette, which became known now as the Garden District. Downriver here, so that would be southeast of Rampart Street, became known as the third municipality. It's now known as the Faubourg Marnier, or just the Marny, because of course, no one in New Orleans says French words properly. That's part of the American influence, but nonetheless. But this is the original city of New Orleans, the French Quarter. Okay, so just showing that photo because I really like it. This is a modern map of New Orleans for those who are unfamiliar. That will give you perhaps a little more reference. But let me go ahead and tell you about another factor that influenced the city that William Flay took control of as mayor. There was actually a period of 15 years where New Orleans was 3 separate cities. So as I mentioned, the Louisiana Purchase happened in 1803. We bought Louisiana from France. At that time, the estimated population was about 8,000. It was 11 blocks along the curve of the Mississippi, hence the name Crescent City, right? So we've got Esplanade, Rampart, and Canal. That was the city of New Orleans. In 1836, it became a world port, busier even than New York City. So it topped New York City for port activity. And by that time, just 30 years later, there was an estimate of 60,000 people there. And New Orleans, much like where I live in St. Augustine, went through this whole moving crown of conquest, French, Spanish, English. So in 1836, the city's Americans, or Anglos, as they're often referred to in research about New Orleans, convinced the legislature to divide the city into 3 sections, 3 semi-autonomous municipalities divided along ethnic lines in competition for one another. Now, why would they do that? Well, this was French territory. The land had been ceded to the Americans, but much like what happened here in St. Augustine, it was Spanish, then it was British, then it was American, right? Bouncing around, there's always going to be squabbles. Whose gun is bigger than the others? Whose ego is bigger than the others? So the Americans came in and had money and were able to set up shops and develop commerce. But they didn't have the political ends to really make changes to mold the city the way they wanted it to be. That was still held by the French. So this idea first came up in the 1820s, when the rivaling military forces would basically play Bloods and Crips, right? Run around the French Quarter and march down the street in all their colors and rattle their sabers and all that nonsense. And these American-led militias would not follow the French officers, even if the French officers were still in positions of power under the American government. The Americans just wouldn't listen to them. And when that would change, when the American military leaders or government leaders would take over, many of the French wouldn't listen to them. So it was, I imagine it was a very small space, 11 blocks, for all that gang posturing. And funny story, there was an editor of an American newspaper, R.D. Richardson, and he published an article and he called for splitting the city along ethnic lines. The effects of journalism and the media on the public mentality. And apparently there was an editor of a French newspaper who offered $5 to anyone who would go whack this guy over the head. Interesting. So the 2 main areas of contention in wanting to divide the city up into ethnic lines came down to infrastructure and permissive culture. So when the Americans took over, there were no paved roads, no street signs, and no colleges or really education beyond the churches. Most of the population was illiterate, and all justice and law was French. Also realize these are basically Protestant Puritans, right? Coming down, that being the predominant way. Sunday was a holy day, right? But not to the French. Sunday was a cafe day, drinking, dancing, enjoying each other and community. Black and white mingled freely, right? There were lots of French for generations who had been marrying the indigenous women, whether they were the Native American women that were indigenous to the area as much as that could be. All of the Native Americans had been moved around so much by that point. or descendants of the slaves. Though again, the French handled the concept of slavery very differently than the Americans did, as did the Spanish here in New Orleans, that being here in St. Augustine, that being a huge contention for all those horrible American treaties that sent them all off the land. But anyway, so we've got the issue with the Americans being infrastructure and the permissiveness of the culture, essentially. And the Creoles found these new Americans just really vulgar and, well, puritanical, and referred to them as Caintoks, or vulgar. Now, the Americans, or the Anglos, as they were called, tried to change everything they could. Just booming businesses and doing everything they could, but the French would come to the American businesses, but they just couldn't make that change. So in 1836, it happened. The city was divided into 3 municipalities, 1 Anglo and 2 Franco. So let's see, is that the next slide? I'll just do it here. This was number 1, the old French Quarter. This became number 2. Now this is a modern map, so what I'm showing you is kind of relative, but it helps you understand it better. So Esplanade, Rampart, Canal. So municipality number 2 was the American section, which went canal just about to Calliope here, where now the I-10 crosses over. It's being Tchoupitoulas down here. And then 3 was over here, downriver from both of those, south and east of Esplanade in the Faubourg Marnier, or called now the Marny. And realize that the predominant form of government and even operating language, or language of the vendors, was English or French, depending upon where you were living. So trade in the second municipality, the American sector, really, really boomed. Of course, they had all the money and they had the support of the rest of America behind them. So everything boomed here. And down here on Camp and Magazine, there were warehouses that boomed, insurance companies, and all that stuff. And just to give you a relative view real quick here, if you are familiar with New Orleans, you know, when you're in the French Quarter, this is Royal Street. When you cross Canal, Royal becomes St. Charles. The streetcar will grab you right here and take you through the central business district. It's called St. Charles. And then you come to Lee Circle right here. You go around Lee Circle, you go under the I-10 at Calliope, and then you take St. Charles all the way out to Carrollton and the other bend in the freeway. This all out here at the time was considered the suburbs of a developing neighborhood called Lafayette that eventually became known as the Garden District. So that's just a little relativity here. If you're coming out away from the French Quarter, you come down St. Charles. If you're coming from the Garden District and going in, you come here, you go around Lee Circle, and you go up Carondelet and go up there. And of course, everything turns right here on Canal. There's no streetcars in the French Quarter. So this is upriver, this is downriver. Okay, so as all this is building up over here in the American sector and then building out, you've got the old French homes here falling into disrepair. All the money was over here. All of this is falling into disrepair. So this kind of became the bad part of town. And it was referred to as the Dirty Third because it was downriver. And of course, people had no concept of the value of, it's not really cool to dump your sewage into a body of water at the time. So garbage and all kinds of noxious things would wash up on the shores here of what was the Marne. And when the city was reunified in 1852, all the wealth of the city really was upriver. In 1860, 76% of the taxable income of the property in New Orleans was upriver of St. Louis Street. So this directions. So good and bad, right? Americans brought infrastructure and education, but with that, they also brought in mores and laws that encoded racism. They did not like the concept of free people of color at all, not from where they were from. Now, the immigration in the 1830s of the German and the Irish, for a variety of reasons that are a whole other video in themselves, and a lot of videos have been made about that, they all moved down here into what was known, what became known as the Irish Channel area, down in here, which was just shacks. And of course, you know, from my other video that the Irish were used to build what was the second canal here that had since been almost completely filled in, and I-10 was built on top of it. But anyway, the direct result of this immigration of German and Irish workers was a completely white sector, a completely white European sector. In fact, in 1835, white workers were noted for protesting the employment of some blacks, be they slaves or Creole or, you know, basically free people of color, for certain types of desirable jobs. Interesting, right? Some things never change. So I just included this. When I started going to New Orleans, the Faubourg Marnier was just this area on the other side of the French Quarter. It was not a big deal. There were beautiful homes there, though they were modest, big, beautiful churches. Everything was more modest, certainly historical and quiet. That changed, as things do. And Katrina and all of that had a huge impact on the Marne. The Marne's also in a low area, and so it would flood. Well, if it rains for 15 minutes, Esplanade turns into a lake. Esplanade is the north-south road that runs between the French Quarter and the Marne. But anyway, that's just a little history about that. Named after a plantation. And the gentleman who started the plantation started subdividing it into a neighborhood for all people, which of course the Americans didn't want to have anything to do with. So these are two pretty big things that are happening in this city. And this speaks of the New Orleans that Papa Flay, I'll call him Mayor Freret, since there are many decades of this family. There are still Flerets in important positions of importance in New Orleans today, I have learned. But this was a real important part of the city that he came in to sit on the big chair of. In 1850, President Zachary Taylor made him the collector of customs of the port of New Orleans. Holy cow. Holy cow. That's massive. That's a pretty powerful position. Now, prior to that, some of the things that Mayor Freret did was in 1841, he developed a free public school system. Now, this was before the reunification of the three segments. This being where the state treasury was responsible for paying each school money every year and actually creating free schools, which is something that did not exist there at all at the time. And this was for the people of color as well as the, shall we say, the Europeans, the white folks, okay? Now he did this through something called the Mcdonough Fund. Now this is another whole fascinating story. Let me move forward to, there he is, this guy, look at that. Look at that Jesuit photo. So let's talk about this loser right here. So Mcdonough was born in South Louisiana, and then he moved to Baltimore. Ding, 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 ding. As I am doing these researches, I am seeing more a epic connection between the Jesuits, the Catholics, Baltimore, and New Orleans. Boom, 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 boom. I'm not going any further in that, but I'm just saying ding, 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 ding. And as I listen to some of Michelle Gibson's videos talking about movements of people in orphanages and hospitals and Catholic charities, and boy, oh boy, there is something about Baltimore and everywhere else. But let's move on. So Mcdonough moved from South Louisiana to Baltimore to work in shipping and real estate. His father had a shipping company, and he was sent to Baltimore to do some work for the company there, in the office there. And he did very, very, very well and made a lot of money, and came back and took over the company for his father, and continued on in that route with all that great Jesuit support behind him. Not going a whole lot into that, but let me just say that he was one of the interesting fellows at the time who supported the American Colonization Society, which organized free transport for freed slaves to Liberia. Send the slaves back to Africa. By the way, he had a plantation in Gretna, which is across the Mississippi from New Orleans. If you go, there are two ferries in New Orleans now. There's the one to Algiers, which you catch there right at the foot of Canal Street. And then there's one further down in the Garden District. Oh gosh, and I can't remember the street. Is it Napoleon? Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the street, but there's another ferry, car ferry, that you can ride over to the South Bank, and that town is known as Gretna. And the last time I was there, there was just this amazing German restaurant over there. Holy cow, like ma and pa. Anyway, Anyway, I'm getting all over myself here. So he helped this movement, the American Colonization Society, sending freed Black people to Liberia. Well, okay, so maybe they wanted to go back. Okay, who knows, right? You can stay here in this hostile environment where you're not going to have any rights because no one wants to see you, right? Or we'll ship you back to this colony that we're building here in Africa, where you can work and do your thing and build your own colony. Okay. The indenturedness of that, although it's not referred to as indenturement, it's referred to as enfranchisement, but they had 15 years to pay back that. Whether it was, I guess it wasn't based on the cost of the passage. The passage was considered free, but what you got once you got there in terms of land, animals, seeds, whatever. So, yeah, needless to say, he had people in Liberia. In fact, he took 2 of his male slaves and educated them both. They both took his name, which was common at the time. When slaves were freed, they often took the name of the plantation owner. So these 2 young men took his name and he educated them both. One did very well and became a doctor. And in fact, the first hospital in New York City that allowed interracial doctors and patients is named after him today. Mcdonough Hospital, named after his son, the slave who he educated. His other son, after his education, moved to Liberia to help take over that colony and got himself elected to a lower house of the legislative Congress there so that he could keep all that good colonization in place. Anyway, Mcdonough amassed 2 million. So that's a lot of money in 1850. And he left it to the city of New Orleans and Baltimore for schools for Blacks, free people of color, and poor whites. Yeah, doesn't this sound like so many things you've heard before? The similarities I'm finding are horrifying. So originally he was buried beside his slaves on the Mcdonough plantation in Gretna, which I was telling you about is across the river from the French Quarter. Gretna, Algiers is across the river from the French Quarter. Gretna is across the river from the Garden District, and I apologize for not being able to remember where the Gretna Ferry is. I can't remember, but it's in the Garden District somewhere. I keep thinking Napoleon, but I don't know if that's right. Anyway, so just to show you what a maniacal lunatic he was, his family exhumed him in 1860 and moved him to be buried in Baltimore. And then exhumed him again in 1945 and placed him on the grounds of the Mcdonough School in Owings Mills, Maryland. And that's what you're looking at here. So there he is, outside the school grounds. Apparently, the money he bequeathed was used to build. And there he is. Not only is there a plaque, but apparently that's where he is underneath all of that. Sick, Mcdonough. Okay, let's move on with that loser. So we're going back to Monsieur Freret, Mayor Freret. So with that money from Mcdonough, he was able to open over 16 free public schools. Cool. Cool. I guess. If you don't think that wasn't mind control, I don't know what is. One of the last things he did as mayor was to veto an ordinance that had come down to cede the land on Esplanade where the mint had been built to the federal government. He said, no. The federal government can own the mint they built, we're keeping the land. Okay. Mayor Flay died on June 14th, 1864, at the age of 60. That's young, even then. His wife, Fanny, continued raising their children. They had 3. Actually, they had 4. An infant died. Frederick, William, and Fanny. He's buried at St. Patrick's Cemetery, and the street Freret and the neighborhood Freret are named after him. So let me make that a little bit bigger. There's the French Quarter. There's the Marne, Faubourg-Marnier, Central Business District, that being basically Canal to about Calliope, and Freret is right over here. So it's down near where the colleges are. We got Loyola and Tulane. That's Freret. The north-south coordinates are Jefferson and Napoleon, and Audubon. That was the Audubon plantation. That's where the zoo is and where all of the colleges are. Oh, looking at this really makes me sentimental and want to go back. Such a different city. What is the Fleury neighborhood was parts of 2 previous plantations, one of them being Audubon. So it's Claiborne, Jefferson, LaSalle, Napoleon. Those are the coordinates for that. And in the 20s and 30s, they had their own streetcar, like streetcar named Desire. Well, there was a streetcar named Flay, and that was the main shopping district for the whole city in the 20s and the 30s. Looking at that just makes me so homesick. That was such an important place to me for so long. All right, we move along the Fleury hustle to his son, William Fleury Jr., who was born in 1833. Now, he was known as one of the most successful post-bellum architects, considered one of the elite architects at the time of his death, being noted as a pioneer in the use of cast iron to create taller buildings. There is a happy birthday, William Freret movement celebration that's done in New Orleans, especially in the Freret neighborhood, but all over the city where his found buildings stand, where his birthday is celebrated and honored as his contribution. Excuse me. His contribution. Jesuits. Excuse me. Okay, so Cousin Will. I'm going to refer to this one as Cousin Will because we have another Freret to talk about this, okay? So we have Mayor Will. This is Cousin Will. Cousin Will studied engineering in Britain and then returned to the city. He came back to New Orleans to take advantage of the city's booming heyday and growth of wealth, which I had just spoken to you about. These Anglos who wanted grandiose constructions to show up one another. Who has the bigger car? Who has the bigger mansion? But apparently, they could get away with that by not paying much because of all the speculative weirdness that was going on. There was a boom, yes, but the boom was based on all this instability that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So Cousin Will used all of his money to build a line of spec homes in the Garden District, which was then called the neighborhood of Lafayette, in hopes to attract wealthy buyers. He finished these homes in 1861. Isn't this a great photo? And I'm not sure, but I think that's Coliseum. There's certainly some Freret homes on Coliseum, and that could be Camp or Coliseum, but I think that's Coliseum. But isn't that a great colored photo? But yeah, he built just like this line of homes, hoping to attract wealthy buyers. Well, there's some more modern photo. Yeah, that's definitely Coliseum. But he lost all his money. And these homes became referred to as Freret's folly. They killed him. The war sent people running out of the city. And the whole bottom fell out. So he joined the military. He joined the New Orleans Light Cavalry, which essentially was a militia that was formed to do escort for elite officers and whatnot. He was assigned to the Army of Mississippi and Tennessee. Local newspapers referred to them as elite security of elite families. But there was a book called A Fine Body of Men, written by a gentleman named Moriarty, who discovered that it was not just high class security, but actually kind of like spies and reconnaissance. His brother Frederick also joined, and they were in time called by General Beauregard to move in to support after the fall of Fort Donelson in 1862. This was considered, I'm not going to go to that photo yet. That's the old Louisiana State Capitol. That's another example of a Freret house. Okay. So where am I? Fall of Fort Donelson, 1862. This was considered Grant's first major victory in the Civil War. At Shiloh, they escorted Major General Leonidas Polk safely from place to place. On May 5th of that year, Cousin Willie joined the 5th Company of the Washington Artillery, which was a New Orleans unit. And in July of that year, he was transferred to the Engineering Corps under the control of Captain Cuthbert Slocum. And he was tasked to be a map maker because he had been educated in Britain in mechanical and engineering type of things. Okay, so he was a map maker for the war. Okay. Next month, he supposedly joined the staff of General Edmund Kirby in the Kentucky offensive, where he was promoted to lieutenant. And General Kirby asked that he be released from the artillery so that he could be promoted to assistant engineer for the military. He was promoted to captain in 1864, acting as the chief engineer in Shreveport, then appointed to lieutenant colonel. So he got sick, being that war is hard, even if you're sitting in an office drawing maps, and he returned home to New Orleans, to his home at 2504 Britannia Street, which he built. We'll see that in a second. That building became the New Orleans Women's Opera Guild. This home that he built inspired a commission from then Senator James Eustis. Let me move ahead to these photos. I got these, excuse me, I got these out of whack. This was his home on Britannia. Okay, this is the home that became the New Orleans Women's Opera Guild. All right, so that was his home. That's the home that he returned to after he got sick. And the construction of this home inspired, I'm sorry, I had these out of whack. The construction of that home inspired the commission for this home, the Senator James Eustis home, which Sandra Bullock now owns. She bought it in 2007. So, Cousin Willie was a Democrat and benefited from the election of President Grover Cleveland. I'm going to back up since I put these out of order, and I apologize for that. His most notable contribution, excuse me while I laugh, is supposed to be the reconstruction of the Louisiana state capitol in Baton Rouge. So my understanding is this is an old photo of the old state capitol. Okay. Must be colorized, right? And this is the new state capitol that he supposedly is responsible for constructing. Looks a lot like the Tallahassee state capitol. He is responsible for the ornate staircase inside and the dome. These are things that happened in his commission to being promoted by President Grover Cleveland to the head of supervising architect. And he sat in that position from 44 to 88. Now, I brought this up before. I don't trust numbers like that. I am not a gematria person. I can't do it. I have like dyslexia for numbers. But when I see stuff like that, to me, it's total coding. It feels like 1844 to 1888. No, that's not a coincidence. No, there's something there. Anyway, let's jump ahead to the things he's supposed to have built. You saw the Capitol. He's not supposed to have built it. He's supposed to have made it snazzy inside. He's supposed to have designed this. The State House in Pineville at the University of Alabama. These are all things that he was able to design because he was the head of the supervising architect. So he used US Treasury money to build government buildings. Sure. And this one. This is the US Courthouse and Post Office in Aberdeen, Mississippi. And this is the US Courthouse and Post Office in Statesville, North Carolina. And this is the US Customs House in Key West. It's now a museum. Let me make that one bigger for you. Well, how about this? The US Post Office in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. What do you think? Interesting, right? Fascinating. Boy, what a talented guy. About the courthouse and post office in Charleston. And this, the Eisenhower Building in Washington, D.C. Of course, it wasn't called the Eisenhower Building at the time. Now, there were a couple other things that he's supposed to have designed that I couldn't find pictures for. One was called the Manse, which was the London Utility Insurance Building. And he is supposed to have designed the old San Francisco Mint, which I certainly could have found a picture for, but I neglected to do so. So sorry about that. It's written that he worked very hard to live up to the Jesuit influences of his education. Gotta love this stuff. Oh, goodness. He died at the age of 78 in 1911, and he is buried in the Army of Tennessee terminus in Metairie, near General Beauregard, who brought him into the fold, shall we say, and put him in a place where he could move up the ladder to supervising architect and build all these snazzy things. Okay, now he had a little cousin, and that was little Jimmy, James Flay, who was born in 1838. Cousin Jimmy and cousin Will. And Jimmy, let's call him James. James learned initially from cousin Will in this craft of architecture. Of course, he was in a legacy family of architects and business investors and all the like, so he could have done whatever he wanted to do, and he obviously had access to all kinds of important and influential clients in the American line and the Creole line. The legacy of his drawings sit in the architecture department of Tulane, and the top of his list of accomplishments, little Jimmy, include the New Orleans Gas Company, the St. Charles Church, Boromoro. Look at how they took the spire off of that. The Cotton, Sugar, and Rice Exchange, the Masonic Temple, and the Iron Bower number 5, as it's called. Again, drawing in that use of wrought iron work from Uncle Will. So, little Jimmy. Now, if you saw my video about Richard Upjohn, one of the reset architects, as I call them, the guy who is supposed to have built all of these Episcopalian churches all over the country, including one that I found here, not too far from me in St. Augustine. Little Jimmy also is attributed with building churches all over the country, but none of them have survived. Nor do we seem to be able to find the drawings, even though the catalog of his drawings are housed at Tulane, but oh well. We'll just move on from that. So yeah, so little Jimmy received his early training from his cousin Will, and then he went to the Jesuit college for his formal training in architecture. Then he was accepted to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Oh my goodness, where he studied from 1860 to 1861. He apprenticed with Charles-Auguste Questel, where he traveled to France, England, and Italy, apprenticing and learning the trade. War broke out, and so he came home. He was commissioned to the Army, to the Engineering Corps. Of course he was. He's a Freret. He's not going to pick up a gun. And he worked on the fortifications of Port Hudson. And this is an old stereoscope, so both sides of the image are the same, but it shows the ramparts here. These are like what we call here around our fort, our star fort around Castillo San Marcos. They were called lines. So it's earthworks that are shored up with timber. And then what was done here is horrifyingly deadly cactus was planted on the top to keep people from crawling over. And then there would have been a waterworks, a moat, shall we say, on either side. So little Jimmy is supposed to have built this cool earthworks. You see the moat there? You see them working there. So that's what Jimmy is supposed to have done. So unfortunately, Port Hudson was attacked. He was wounded in the attack. And in 1863, he was actually taken prisoner. And there was a 48-day siege at Port Hudson, which was supposed to have been the most horrific and longest siege in the Civil War up to that point. But he was released. I wonder if that's because his name was Freret. What do you think? So he was able to return to New Orleans and he launched his architectural career. So what are we talking about? 1863. I think the Civil War was still going on in 1863, right? It went till 65, right? I mean, I think, I'm not looking at a piece of paper, but I think it went till 65. But even if it didn't last till 65, New Orleans was hit pretty hard during the Civil War. That being the case, homes were all he could get commissions for, and that didn't pay very well at all. Now, this is how I found out about this family, okay? This next little tidbit of information. He entered the commission with Mulligan to build St. Vincent's. That's how I found out about this guy. Although I remember when I lived in New Orleans, I remember the Freret neighborhood and I remember Freret Street. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But that's how this video came about, was him coming up in losing the commission to Mulligan. Mulligan. Could they have picked a better name for that? You know, a cheater? So he built some homes, which are all over the city, essentially. I showed one earlier. That's all he could get. But it was conveniently from the Jesuits, who in 1869 gave him his first significant commission. So we're to believe that little Jimmy in 1869 built this, the Jesuit Church of Immaculate Conception at 130 Baton. Let's take a look at this. Wow, look at that. You know, I just noticed that there. I hadn't noticed that before. There's the date. Or at least that's the finding date, right? Because you know, he didn't know anything about the free energy powers of limestone and red brick, or concrete and red brick. Because he didn't build this, he found it. Look at that resonator and those plasma collectors. Nice for a first commission, right? Dang, it pays to be legacy. No, he didn't build a church. What he's attributed with building is the altar. Well, that's kind of strange, isn't it? I mean, do architects build altars? Well, apparently he did. This is a chapel at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. Interesting. Look at that scary thing. Fascinating. He was also supposed to have built a Jesuit chapel tomb that's at St. Louis I, but I couldn't find one for that. And then he designed another altar here. Would you look at that? Since when do architects design altars? But people are stupid, you know? I mean, let's just look at this Antiquitech a little closely. This one's a little easier to see. Moonstrances, right? Little power generators, little power packs. This one's really powerful. Look at that one. Man. Yeah, cool. People are stupid. And then we're returning to this. 1875, St. Charles Borromoro at 174 Church Street and Grand Couteau. This being one of his major accomplishments. Let's take a look at that. Look at all these plasma collectors. This is just, wow, and they took the spire off. Made it look like the top of the Eisenhower Building. That would have been some kind of bell tower. You know, that would have been like, you see really old pictures in Europe of like horseshoe magnet arches with bells, you know, the size of a house. I think that potentially was one of those. Funny, huh? Oh, you know, I just noticed that. What is that statue right there? I didn't notice that before. Oh, that must be Saint Charles. Saint Charles. I don't know. Don't you love these reset architects? Here's another shot. Got a couple good ones. Beautiful little photo. Look at that. Gorgeous. Man, the resonating power of that. On those fires. Just imagine, oh my gosh, how powerful that would have been, especially with that one on top. Now this is from 1872, and this was a house commission for Bradish Johnson. This sits at 341 Britannia. Let's take a look at this. Sure, he did. Sure, he did. Yeah, you bet. Not a problem. New Orleans Gas and Light, 1875. Little Jimmy. Look at that. Little Jimmy. I suppose this could be one of his drawings. Since all of his drawings, or a good mass of his drawings, sit in Tulane. This is St. Patrick's Hall, 1875. This is supposed to be the construction that really cemented his reputation. Funny, right? All the plasma collectors up here. Love that. Real interesting. Generator there, cymatic resonator. We've got the arching, right? And the pillars. Full of iron. Oh, but it was his cousin Willie who is supposed to have used the iron in the building for the reason of being able to build higher. And that's what it's attributed to. Putting iron in the building allowed you to build a taller building. That was also Freret. That was cousin Willie. Yeah, right. So this is the Freret cenotaph that he drafted and received a commission for in 1875, but actually, if I read correctly, was never actually constructed. Never actually constructed. So what does that mean? This is one of the drawings from Tulane. What does that mean? Well, this once stood and he made a drawing of it, and at some point it was torn down. That's what it means. Family cenotaph with probably a iron barring around it. That's a nice family cenotaph. No, he did not design St. Louis Cathedral, which is what this is. What he is attributed to designing was another one of these for Pope Pius IX, which sits in St. Louis Cathedral. So that's three. That's three altars that he's supposed to have built. Oh, And he's supposed to have built all these churches throughout the South, none of which stand. Pretty nice. Pretty nice for little Jimmy. This is a building from Straight University, which was a black college at the time, that supposedly he designed. Nice bell tower. Look at that. And of course, this. So you've got they would have had the interlocking, like caduceus iron rods inside, circling around like the caduceus, and then you would have had the iron arch up here. So really powerful bar magnet. And oh, is that an octagon? A little power pack, little battery pack over there? And is that mud flood? Huh. 1878, Lehman Brothers store, considered one of his primary contributions. Would you look at all of that? Look at that. Magnificent. Little Jimmy, 1878. He's supposed to have designed another store that I couldn't find a photo for, the Burke store on Chapatulas. In 1885, he was supposed to have built the Dalsheimer Company on Canal. And if I got this right, that's what you're looking at here. Look at that. Wow, look at all of that. Nice, Jimmy. You know, there are people who have said that the intrusion of all these power lines was actually essentially photoshopping, because these pictures are older than power lines. The woman who produced Ether, the water that connects everything, and I can't remember her name now, but the video series Ether, the water that connects everything, she presented that. But this photo is actually older than electricity, and that was photoshopped in. 1896. He was supposed to have designed this, the Little Sisters of the Poor, the Convent of St. Mary. So he didn't get St. Vincent's Infant Asylum, which became St. Vincent's Guest House, which now is luxury condos. But he did get Little Sisters of the Poor, because New Orleans was overrun with orphans at the time for a variety of reasons, including orphan trains. Pretty nice. Pretty nice. Yeah, all radium heaters. Not heaters, chimneys. This is the Lano house. Look at it, had a spire, house commission. This is Orleans Music Store on Canal Street, or it used to be. Now it's a jean store. Just look at that. Just look at this. Orleans Music Store, you know, where all those New Orleans guys bought their instruments. Dr. John bought all his guitars there, you know. Look at that. Look at that. Yeah, little Jimmy built this. Look at all that antiquitech. Bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet. Next to, holy cow, more of the same. And then don't you love this one, right? Because that's what's going on inside, right? It's like the caduceus of crossing iron wires or copper and iron inside, creating the battery effect. Cool. That dates it. Look at that great car. This is Holy Cross School, which he's also supposed to have built. Got some great relativity by the cars. Look at that, oh my God. Yeah, he built this. Yeah, sure he did. What do you think? You think he did? I don't. This was the Toro Infirmary. So like infirmary being like a public hospital. 1852. It's not looking too good. No, looking too good. Still. You think he built it? I don't. Oh, I'm sorry. That was not the Toro Infirmary. Oh, you know what? I think that's a picture of Holy Cross now. Yeah, that's before here. Okay, that was a picture of Holy Cross before. Sorry about that. That's a picture of Holy Cross now. Sorry about that. And that's the Toro Infirmary. So think of like a public hospital, charity hospital. Bar magnet. There was all kinds of stuff on top that they took away. Now, Jimmy had a daughter, Helena, and she was an architect too. And this is one of her drawings. Oh, keeping it in the family. Supposedly, cousins Jimmy and Willie collaborated on this. The big Masonic Temple. Holy Toledo. Nice. Nice. Little Sisters of the Poor School. I've showed you that already, but the sugar and rice exchange. Let's look at that. Top there. Yeah. All this magnificent architecture and horse and buggy. Oh, would you look at that Hyperborean door and all these, look at that. Oh, bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet, big bar magnet. Plasma collector, plasma collector, plasma collector. Might have been mercury balls back in the day. This is another one that cousins Jimmy and Willie were supposed to have collaborated on, the Moresque building, which stands no more. I guess this was one of their drawings. Hyperborean doors. Bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet, bar magnet. Yeah. Busy, really busy, right? Really busy guys. This is the McGehee School, which started out as a home and apparently now is a school. Or maybe it was the other way around. The Garden District. Little Sisters of the Poor again. And there's Cousin Willie. Cousin Willie taught little Jimmy so much. So much. Now, little Jimmy also, as you know, was heading the Office of Supervising Architects, and that gave him the opportunity to get the federal money to build all these snazzy things. And Cousin Willie and his position as supervising architect, which he held before, really helped cement that. Now, what's left of this today is the ongoing Flay legacy in Freret Realty. So what do you think? You think these guys really built all this? It's interesting to consider how all that money talks and Jesuit influences paved the way for things. And I think I'm going to look into Gallier next, too. Is another real important architect. And I found some very similar stuff, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready to leave New Orleans quite yet in my mystery. But yeah, fascinating, right? How two guys built so much. How one guy, Uncle Will, was able to make all those changes in New Orleans, reunite a city who had been divided into 3 municipalities, get a hold of all that dirty Jesuit money with deep Baltimore connections to build all those schools. And he's heralded as a hero. I'll let you decide what constitutes a hero. And I'm going to end that right here, letting you decide what constitutes a hero. As I again acknowledge my gratitude and excitement to be included in the Unguru Ensemble. Thank you, Michelle Gibson. Thank you, Miss Melanie. Thank you for the acknowledgement and the encouragement and inclusion in the group. Looking forward to doing more there and getting some interviews going and get some education going on the platform. So I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today in a city that has been very important to me in my life, New Orleans, and learning more than you wanted to know or cared to know about the Flay hustle and reset architects. So I've kept you long enough. I am grateful to all your comments and coffee purchases. And until the next video, this is Joyce from Medusa Was Framed of the Unguru Ensemble saying aloha.